Welcome learners. Today we are going to talk about Dorothy Smith's feminist standpoint theory. In this presentation, we shall navigate through the conceptual trajectories through which feminist standpoint theory has come across, and particularly the theory that we will be discussing today is put forward by Dorothy E. Smith. It emerged as a groundbreaking theoretical intervention within sociology, feminist studies, and critical epistemology during the late 20th century. I am Dr. Moutan, Assistant Professor of Sociology, Haldia Government College, West Bengal, India. Let us discuss the aims and objectives of the presentation today. The primary aim is to provide an intense comprehension of feminist standpoint theory as a critical epistemological approach. This means the presentation seeks to help learners understand how knowledge is produced, validated, and understood, particularly from a feminist perspective that challenges traditional knowledge-making process. The talk is designed to develop analytical skills that enable learners to deconstruct institutional practices, explore the complexities of intersectionality, critically examine how social structures and power dynamics shape the knowledge production. The major objective of the talk is to cultivate critical reflexivity among the learners. This involves encouraging students to think deeply about their own social positioning that influences their understanding. They will be able to develop the ability to question established academic and scholarly paradigms, and they will be able to learn to recognize hidden biases in traditional research methodology. The presentation aims to challenge masculine-centric epistemological traditions and reveal how traditional academic and scientific frameworks have systematically excluded women's perspective. By the end of the talk, learners are expected to recognize knowledge as inherently positioned and contextual and develop skills in intersectional research and analysis. Let's introduce feminist standpoint theory. Unlike traditional sociological approaches that claimed objective detached perspectives, Smith's theoretical framework radically repositioned women experiences as central to understanding social structures and knowledge production. Her work fundamentally challenged the dominant masculine-centric epistemological traditions that had historically marginalized women's perspectives and experiences from the male domain. Smith's theoretical contributions were not merely academic exercises but represented profound political and intellectual challenges to established scholarly paradigms. By arguing that knowledge is always positioned and contextual, she highlighted how traditional academic and scientific frameworks systematically excluded women's experiences, their perspectives, thereby perpetuating existing power structures, which is male-centric. Her standpoint theory provided a robust critique of positivist research methodologies that claimed universal, neutral knowledge while simultaneously maintaining implicit masculine biases. Her work, Everyday World as a Problematic of Feminist Sociology, talks about the notion of recognizing the male biases as a society and being conscious from a woman's perspective and noticing the inequality between male and female. Her work intended to create sociology for women as this is a male-dominated field. Smith wanted to create a field of sociology that questioned everyday problems of life from a feminist angle. Feminist standpoint theory is a pivotal line of feminist inquiry, and it is quite contentious and predominant because it confronts the pre-feminist and reductionist mainstream of philosophy of science. Traditional models of scientific inquiry and knowledge are subject of critique. The dominant knowledge practices, as aforementioned, suppressed the women from inquiry, denied their epistemic authority, slighted their cognitive features, sneered at their knowledge and contribution, endorsed the gender hierarchies, and produced theories to complement the male interests. That is why the status quo came under intense scrutiny and the feminist standpoint theory was created. Thus, the standpoint theory is not a simplistic attribution solely of being female. Instead, it is a political achievement of those whose social location provides the basis for feminist standpoint theory. It is needed as a catalyst to allow one's eyes to open and admit multiple subjectivities, which were absent in the traditional sociological paradigms. Talking about the theoretical premise of standpoint theory, it can be said that it emerged from a profound intellectual traditions that seeks to radically reimagine how knowledge is created, validated, and understood. At its core, the theory represented a revolutionary challenge to the dominant epistemological frameworks that have long privileged masculine, Western, and elite perspectives as universal and objective. To fully appreciate Smith's contribution, we must understand the intellectual landscape from which her theory emerged. The late 20th century was a critical period of epistemological questioning, with postmodern and critical theories increasingly challenging the notion of objective, universal knowledge. Feminist scholars, in particular, were dismantling the illusion of a neutral, detached scholarly perspective that had long marginalized their experiences and insights. Smith's work built upon earlier feminist critiques while introducing a unique methodological approach in social science and sociology. Unlike some of her contemporaries who simply argued for including women's perspectives, Smith fundamentally restructured how we conceptualize knowledge production. He argued that knowledge is not a neutral collection of facts, but a deeply political and social process intimately tied to power relations. The concept of standpoint is a far more complex than a simple subjective viewpoint. Smith conceptualizes it as an active, critically developed perspective that emerges from lived experiences while simultaneously analyzing the social structures that shape those experiences. This is not about personal opinion, but about developing a sophisticated analytical lens that reveals social dynamics typically hidden from dominant perspectives. Thus, personal narratives becomes a tool. Let's talk about the institutional ethnography, that is a methodological innovation that can be found in Dorothy Smith's work. Central to her theoretical contributions that she developed was institutional ethnography, which is a methodological approach that investigates how social institutions coordinate human activities and experiences. This approach shifts analytical focus from abstract theoretical frameworks to actual everyday experiences of individuals, particularly women. Smith defines institutional ethnography as a way to connect lived experiences and institutional practices. This approach allows to examine how institutions shape people's lives. By tracing institutional practices and discourses shape lived realities, institutional ethnography provides a nuanced understanding of power mechanisms that often remains invisible in traditional sociological research, that remained invisible actually. Institutional ethnography challenges researchers to examine how bureaucratic practices, administrative documents, and organizational protocols actively construct social experiences. It argued that these institutional texts and practices are not neutral but actively produce specific social relations and subject positions. By analyzing these everyday institutional mechanisms, researchers can uncover how power operates through seemingly mundane administrative everyday processes. Dorothy Smith's institutional ethnography represents profound reimagining of how social research can uncover the hidden mechanisms of power and experience. At its heart, this approach is like a detailed map-making process where the researcher traces the intricate pathways through which social institutions shape our daily lives. Imagine social institutions as a complex machinery with invisible gears and levers that determine how people move, interact, and understand themselves. Institutional ethnography is the careful process of taking part in this machinery, revealing how administrative documents, bureaucratic practices, and organizational protocols actually create and maintain social experiences. Let us talk about how this feminist standpoint theory critiqued the traditional sociology. Smith argued that traditional sociological methods often ignore women's viewpoints, their lived experiences, the spaces that women share, the shared meanings that remains there within that space. She highlighted how mainstream sociology tends to produce male perspectives and often generalizes findings without considering gender specific context. In contrast to traditional sociology, Smith's approach began with the subjectivity of women's experiences. She prioritized lived realities. Her research uncovers truth that conventional methods may miss, providing a more nuanced understanding of social dynamics. Smith critiques existing traditional knowledge and research frameworks because they fail to capture this lived experience shared by women. Within her critical feminist standpoint, she critiques the validity of traditional epistemology approaches because most of them derive theories from the male perspective, thus failing to accommodate women's voices and perspectives who contribute to the social world understanding equally with the men. Therefore, in order to refocus the traditional epistemological fieldwork, Smith criticizes and proposes an alternative. The current epistemological framework offers an incomplete knowledge of the social world, proving that epistemologists should listen to women and consider their lived experiences and perspectives. He criticized the feminist framework of difference for insufficiently redefining the traditional knowledge, and that is a problem. He demonstrated that a framework of difference does not address the core problem, which is marginalization and undervaluation of women's perspectives and experiences. A feminist framework of difference contradicts the fundamental problematic by claiming that men and women should have the same social standing and that their difference should be valued based on their unique experiences and contributions. Let's talk about how feminist standpoint theory challenged objectivity and reimagined knowledge altogether, providing us an alternative in understanding social reality. The standpoint theory fundamentally challenged the concept of scientific objectivity and argued that traditional notions of objectivity were themselves deeply gendered and they were gendered constructs. She demonstrated how supposedly neutral scientific and academic practices were actually embedded in masculine perspectives that presented themselves as universal. By revealing these hidden biases, Smith opened critical spaces for reimagining knowledge production as a more inclusive and reflexive process. The theory proposed that marginalized perspectives offer more comprehensive insights into social realities, precisely because they require critical analysis of dominant power structures. Women, particularly those experiencing multiple forms of marginalization, develop sophisticated interpretive skills that enable them to simultaneously navigate and critically examine social systems. This perspective transforms alleged subjective experiences into robust analytical tools for understanding complex social dynamics. At the heart of Smith's standpoint theory is the concept of standpoint. It's a complex process. It suggests that knowledge production is linked to power structures, dominant power structures. Women due to their unique experiences offer valuable insights that has the potential to challenge the traditional notion of objective knowledge making. Traditional sociological research often operates from a distant, supposedly objective perspective. In contrast, Smith's method begins exactly where people live their lives in the everyday world. He argues that true understanding comes out from abstract theories, but from carefully examining how real people navigate through institutional systems. A hospital intake form, a workplace performance review, or a school registration document becomes more than just a paperwork. It is a powerful tool that defines social relationships, categorizes individuals, and reproduces existing power structures within the institutions. The theory's revolutionary insight is that knowledge is never neutral. What we consider objective is actually deeply embedded into some context with perspectives from dominant social groups, typically masculine, Western, and elite. By centering marginalized experiences, particularly those of women, Smith reveals how traditional knowledge production systematically excludes entire groups of people. Intersectionality is crucial to this approach. A working class woman of color does not simply have a combined perspective, but a uniquely sophisticated understanding developed through navigating multiple, often conflicting social systems at the same time. Her standpoint emerges from this complex skill of simultaneously existing within and critically examining social structures. This isn't about creating a hierarchy of operation, but about recognizing the nuanced ways of different social positions that create unique forms of knowledge. A person's lived experience becomes an analytical tool, transforms what might seem like personal stories into powerful insights about the social dynamics. Smith challenges researchers to reimagine their work. Instead of treating research subjects as objects to be studied, she advocates for approaches that simplify, that amplify marginalized voices and recognize the political nature of knowledge production. Her method demands that we see research as a collaborative process where those typically excluded from academic discourse become central to understanding social realities. The enduring power of institutional ethnography lies in its ability to make the invisible visible, to show how seemingly mundane institutional practices shape our most intimate experiences of self and society. It's a method that doesn't just describe the world, but offers a transformative way of understanding how power operates in our everyday lives through various institutions. We can talk about intersectionality, that is the subjectivity of the narratives when we talk about institutional practices. The standpoint theory inherently recognizes that women's experiences are not monolithic, not linear, but deeply differentiated by race, class, gender, sexuality, and various other axes of social differentiation. Intersectionality within standpoint means acknowledging that different women occupy varied social locations that fundamentally shape their perspectives and experiences. Smith's approach to intersectionality goes far deeper than merely acknowledging multiple identity categories. She reveals how different axes of the social differentiation and positioning and location, like gender, race, class, sexuality, interact with each other in a complex, dynamic ways to shape knowledge production. This is not about creating a hierarchy of operation, but understanding the intricate web of social relations that produce unique perspectives. Far more than simple accounting of identity categories, intersectionality represents a complex dynamic understanding of human experience that challenges traditional approaches to social analysis. At its core, intersectionality recognizes that no individual exists within a single uniform social context. Instead, each person navigates an intricate web of social position defined by interconnected dimensions like gender, race, class, sexuality, disability, and other axes of social differentiation. These dimensions are not independent layers that they can be easily separated and understood, but deeply intertwined systems of power that fundamentally shape an individual's perspective and lived reality. A working class woman of color, for example, does not simply have a combined perspective, but a fundamentally distinct way of understanding social dynamics. Her standpoint emerges from navigating multiple, often conflicting social systems, developing sophisticated interpretive skills that reveal social complexities she experienced that remained invisible to those who were in privileged positions. These differences are not limitations, but rich sources of nuanced social understanding that challenge homogeneous representations of women's experiences. Next, we are going to discuss about the how personal narratives becomes voice to the marginalized perspectives and becomes a tool rather than an alternative tool in the mythological empire of Dorothy Smith. Incorporating personal narratives is essential for constructing feminist knowledge. Smith argues that individual stories provide context and depth to research findings. For example, a study that is going to explore violence might include interviews with the survivors, allowing their voices to inform understanding and solutions. Smith's approach transforms personal narratives from mere anecdotal evidence to powerful analytical tools. These are not sentimental stories, but rigorous accounts that reveal that intricate ways of social structures are experienced and negotiated constantly. A survivor's account of domestic violence, for instance, is not just a personal story, but a complex analysis of power which is both situated and structured and are institutionally responded and socially conditioned. By focusing on personal narratives, researchers can amplify marginalized perspectives, create empathy, and educate wider audience about the realities faced by different women. Personal narratives sit at the heart of Dorothy Smith's feminist standpoint theory, serving as a powerful analytical tools that transform individual experiences into profound social insights. Far from being mere emotional storytelling, these narratives are rigorous intellectual interventions that reveal the complex ways of social structures are experienced, negotiated, and challenged. In Smith's framework, personal narratives are not supplementary evidence but central mechanisms for understanding social realities. They represent a radical methodological approach that centers the voices of those traditionally marginalized in academic and scientific discourse. These stories do more than describe individual experiences. They expose the intricate ways institutional practices shape human lives. In a sense, personal narratives are not stories, but they act as intellectual resistance, powerful mechanisms for revealing the complex ways of social structures are experienced, negotiated, and potentially transformed. Feminist standpoint theory has broader implications for social research and feminist praxis. It has significant implications for social research methodologies. Traditional methods often prioritize quantitative data, but Smith's approach encourages qualitative methods that include voices of those that remained unheard and marginalized. Research can incorporate her ideas by conducting interviews, focus groups, or ethnographies that prioritize lived experiences. This way, studies will become more reflexive, multidimensional, multifaceted, and diverse realities with better equipped to address the social inequalities in a broader level. Standpoint theory can actively challenge power structures within society. By prioritizing the voice of the oppressed, Communities can push for changes in the policy making and practices that perpetuate inequality. They can give their voices. Current events such as the movement for racial justice demonstrate how collective voices can spark change. The personal narratives can be used as an important tool. Activists using standpoint theory may emphasize the experience of the marginalized individuals, creating a more inclusive movement that seeks to dismantle systematic injustices. However, we receive critical acceptance and scholarly impact of the standpoint theory too, like any other theory have. Uh, Critics, however, have raised important questions about the theory's potential for overgeneralizing women's experiences and the challenges of representing multiple intersecting perspectives. Critics often raise concerns about essentialism within standpoint theory. Researchers must be cautious to avoid essentialist interpretations of Smith's work. By acknowledging diversity within women's experiences, they can enrich their analysis and create more accurate representations of lived realities. Achieving a universal feminist standpoint remains challenging, however, especially in light of diverse experiences. While Smith's framework calls for recognizing different lived realities, it raises questions about how to create common ground among various women's perspectives. Methodologically, incorporating personal narrative requires a fundamental shift in research practice. Researchers must create safe, respectful spaces for storytelling, listen without imposing predetermined interpretive frameworks, recognize narratives as co-researchers, not just as subjects, develop methodological approaches that honor the complexity of lived experiences. Some scholars have argued that while the theoretical framework is compelling, implementing institutional ethnography requires sophisticated methodological skills and more reflexive research practices. The enduring legacy of Dorothy Smith's feminist standpoint. Dorothy Smith's standpoint theory has been both celebrated and critiqued within academic circles. Scholars have praised its radical potential for centering marginalized perspectives and challenging traditional epistemological frameworks. Feminist researchers across disciplines have found that the approach methodologically very generative, offering innovative ways to conceptualize research that prioritize lived experiences, everyday life experiences. At the heart of Smith's intellectual contribution is a radical reimagining of how knowledge can be created and validated. Her work dismantled the long-standing myth of object universal knowledge and revealing how traditional academic and scientific frameworks were deeply embedded with masculine, objective, Western, and elite understanding. This critical intervention opened up entirely new intellectual landscapes, providing marginalized voices with a sophisticated theoretical framework that can challenge dominant epistemological traditions. Smith's theory has profoundly influenced multiple academic disciplines. In sociology, she revolutionized the research methodologies by providing alternative qualitative methods and by introducing institutional ethnography, an approach that traces how social institutions coordinate with human experiences and interactions. Feminist studies have gained powerful analytical tool that goes beyond simply adding women's perspectives, instead fundamentally restructuring how we understand the knowledge making procedures. Critically, epistemology found in her works a nuanced critique of traditional notions of objectivity and scientific inquiry. The practical implications of her work extend far beyond academic circles. Activists and social justice movements have embraced their theoretical work as a powerful tool for understanding and challenging systematic inequalities that exist. By centering marginalized perspectives, Smith provided a methodology for revealing how power operates through seemingly mundane institutional practices. Contemporary movements addressing gender inequality racial justice, and social equity continue to draw inspiration from her approach. In contemporary academic research, Smith's legacy is evident in the increasing emphasis on reflexive research practices, intersectional approaches to understanding social experiences, methodologies that prioritize lived experiences, critical examination of institutional power structures. Her work has been particularly transformative in fields like healthcare, education, and social policy. Researchers now recognize that understanding social phenomena requires listening to the most marginalized by existing systems. Smith taught that the most comprehensive insights often come from those who navigate the complex social structures with the most sophistication. The ongoing relevance of Smith's work is perhaps more powerfully demonstrated in how it continues to inspire new generation of scholars and activists. Her theory provides a framework for understanding how social positioning shapes knowledge, how power operates in institutional practices, and how marginalized perspectives offer unique and valuable insights into social realities. In this slide, I have provided a conceptual contour of the whole talk for the ease of the learners to understand the whole understanding of Dorothy Smith's feminist standpoint theory. It represents a transformative intervention in understanding knowledge production, social experience, and power dynamics. By centering marginalized perspectives and challenging traditional epistemological assumptions, the theory offers a profound reimagining of how we conceptualize scholarly research in social understanding. The enduring significance of Smith's work lies in its ability to reveal how knowledge is always political, contextual, and deeply embedded in social relations. Her theoretical contributions continue to inspire researchers across disciplines to develop more nuanced, reflexive, and ethically committed approaches to understanding social realities. In this slide, we talk about the outcome of the whole talk after we end the formal lecture or the body of the talk, the productive delivery of the talk. And the learners at the end of the talk will be able to recognize how knowledge is inherently contextual, positioned, and recognized, and that how social positioning shapes such knowledge production. The talk will help the learners to grasp about institutional ethnography as a methodology in tracing construction of social experiences by institutional practices and to develop skills in intersectional analysis in recognizing the differentiated nature of women's experiences. Learners will begin to cultivate reflexive research practices that actively amplify marginalized voices and challenge traditional research paradigms. We provide some engagement activities and exercise for the learners here so that they can see whether the talk was productive for them or not, whether they could connect to the productivity of the concept. To make sure that it went productive and fruitful for the learner, some questions and activities have been given. Five questions have been asked here for the students to cultivate, like how does Dorothy Smith's concept of institutional ethnography challenge the traditional notions? That how can individual stories serve as a powerful analytical tool? How can personal narratives become tool for methodological analysis? And how that can pose a challenge even to methodology itself? And for the same purpose, how methodology can be evolved and get more skilled. That is also a question to thought about. That how does the interaction of different social entities like gender, race, class, disability, sexuality create unique perspectives that challenge simplified understanding of social experience, and that how Dorothy Smith's feminist standpoint might be applied and can reflect upon broader contemporary social issues. One engagement activity has have been given for the learners sec. They can select an institution, it may be a school or a college or a university or a clinic, any healthcare system or even a workplace, and they can map out the administrative documents, the protocols that the institution have, the rules and regulations the institution have, the institutional practices that are mandate for all the members of the institution, they can map out that. And after mapping that, they can analyze how such institutional mechanisms, the protocols, the regulations shape the members' experiences, how the members are experiences those structured regulations. And after that, they can provide a reflexive essay exploring the hidden power dynamics revealed that has been revealed through this mapping exercise, so that they can understand how members' actions are heavily shaped, informed, and determined by the power dynamics within the institutions. A list of reference has been given in the next slide, which has been provided here from where we can understand that the talk has been deeply informed and are deeply indebted to. And all the pictures that has been used in the PowerPoint presentation to make the PowerPoint presentation more attractive and far reaching for the learners, so that they can come over of the boredom of listening to a lecture for a long time. So there are various visuals have been used in the presentations. All these visuals have been taken from Google with a Creative Commons license. Thank you.